When people talk about classic westerns, it's always the same handful of movies, right? But there's a whole bunch of overlooked stuff out there that barely gets a mention. A spaghetti western that ends with an entire town forced to strip naked. A Gene Wilder western comedy where his sidekick is Harrison Ford, right after Star Wars. And a Vincent Price western where he cons the U.S. government out of Arizona. These aren't the classics everyone knows. These are the westerns you've never seen. This one's basically a buddy western, but with Gene Wilder playing a Polish rabbi wandering across the Old West trying to get to San Francisco. And then you've got Harrison Ford, fresh off Star Wars, as an outlaw bank robber who just kind of adopts him along the way. The whole movie's just them running into one mess after another, bandits, weird towns, even a silent Trappist monastery that Wilder manages to disrupt. The movie's got a weird history. The director, Robert Aldrich, actually took over after the first director bailed. The plot is kind of loose, just a string of comic set pieces, and critics at the time said it was charming but messy. New York Times called it harmless chaos, a lot of cute bits that don't totally hang together. Roger Ebert didn't know what to do with the tone, said it's like the movie was trying every possible style. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 54%. And honestly, not even the combo of Wilder and Ford totally saves it, but some people love how heartwarming it is. The chemistry between those two guys is the whole reason to watch. It's got a bit of a cult following now. Wilder himself called it Young Frankenstein meets The Dirty Dozen. Vincent Price stars here as James Rivas, an actual 19th century con man who cooked up this scheme to forge Spanish land grants and claim all of Arizona for himself, using a fake baroness he invents and marries. He goes all in. Fakes the paperwork, invents lineage for his wife, scares people off the land, almost gets a $25 million payout from the government before the scam blows up. The story is set between the 1870s and 1890s, loosely based on true events. Directed by Samuel Fuller, who later moved on to tougher war and noir movies. At the time, not a lot of people watched it, but it's picked up some interest with Fuller fans. There's even this weird piece of trivia. Ed Wood, the guy behind Plan 9 from Outer Space, apparently did some uncredited stunt work on this film. Critics now say it's pretty far-fetched in spots, but they respect Fuller's ambition, and the story just keeps moving. It's a different look for Vincent Price, way outside his usual horror stuff, and worth seeing just for that. Now here's one that just kind of slipped through the cracks. Monte Walsh, 1970, with Lee Marvin and Jack Palance. This is about an aging cowboy realizing the West he knew is disappearing, and there's just no place for guys like him anymore. And for once, Palance isn't the villain here. It's not just shootouts and action. There's enough gunplay and Lee Marvin doing the tough guy thing, but what makes it work are the quiet moments. Palance actually gets to be a friend, not the bad guy. You buy their friendship and you really feel for these guys trying to figure out what's next. The director, William Fraker, mostly known as a cinematographer, really let Marvin act here, didn't box him in with just gruff faces and one-liners. Marvin was paid $1 million plus 10%, which was a huge deal at the time, but the box office just wasn't there. Fraker only got a couple more shots at directing and they didn't go anywhere. Cinema Center Films, the studio, folded a couple years later. Fraker went back to being a cinematographer and got 5 Oscar nominations. But honestly, this movie deserves more credit. Ebert called it as lovely a Western as I've seen in a long time. It's got action, but it's also about real people, real loss, the end of an era. Not many Westerns do that. This one's got Randolph Scott, but he's not your standard hero here. He plays Bart Allison, comes into the town of Sundown looking to kill a guy he blames for his wife's death, and ends up hijacking a wedding and holding the whole town hostage. And the more you watch, the more you realize this guy isn't some righteous hero. He's bitter, probably wrong, and honestly kind of hard to like. That's not something you see in a lot of 50s Westerns. Later reviews have called Bart one of the most unlikable heroes of that decade. The whole story's about justice, revenge, and how the townspeople are maybe just as bad. Even the director Bud Bedecker later on said this one and Westbound were the only mediocre films he did with Scott, but I think it's more interesting than he gives it credit for. It's a darker, more cynical take, and you can feel Scott's usual cool hero thing kind of falling apart here. Not perfect, a little simple at times, but worth seeing if you want something that goes off the usual Western formula. This is a real B movie. Republic Pictures, 1950, kind of lost in the shuffle. Forrest Tucker plays Mike Prescott, a saloon owner in a California boomtown, and Adele Mara's Beth, the settler he saves from an Indian attack. Later, she finds out Mike killed her brother in a bar fight. Self-defense, but you know how these things go. From there, it's all tangled up. Beth thinks Mike's a villain, his partner is actually running a stagecoach gang and trying to frame him, and Beth has to figure out who to trust. It's only 90 minutes, but it packs a lot in. Romance, action, a bit of a mystery. The script's tight, written by James Edward Grant, who also did John Wayne's Angel and The Bad Man. The dialogue's sharper than you'd expect. It was so good I had to check if Roy Huggins wrote it. The banter really helps lift it above the average. At the time, critics didn't care. It was just another programmer, but if you go back now, fans of old westerns actually love this one. It rises quite a ways above your average western. If you're into spaghetti westerns and you haven't seen this, you're missing out. What makes this one stand out is basically it's Greek tragedy reworked as a western. Sebastian, played by Leonard Mann, finds out he actually survived a massacre as a kid. Turns out the whole thing was planned by his own mother and her lover. They kill off Sebastian's dad, who's a Mexican general, just to take power for themselves. And as you'd expect, this is one of those stories where the past doesn't stay buried. Sebastian comes back for payback, with help from his childhood friend and his sister. What you get is a straight-up revenge story. There's hidden identities, a ton of betrayal, and it all comes to a head in this burning mansion at the end. The opening massacre and the big showdown with everything on fire are some of the best set pieces you'll see in a spaghetti western. Critics have called those scenes glorious, and honestly, I agree. Here's another one from 1969, The Specialist, directed by Sergio Corbucci. By this point, Corbucci's already done Django and The Great Silence, and here he decides to get a little weird. Johnny Halliday, who was basically France's Elvis, stars as Dixon, this super stoic gunslinger. He rolls into the alpine town of Blackstone to find out who lynched his brother and to get back some missing gold. Pretty standard setup, until it isn't. Everyone in this town is corrupt, and no one wants to admit what they've done. And Corbucci, instead of making Dixon the classic lone avenger out for one villain, kind of turns him against the whole town. The finale is notorious. A group of hippie-like kids force the entire town to crawl naked through the street. Dixon, wounded, drives them off. It's a bizarre, memorable ending that critics have called one of the strangest in the Western genre. Corbucci always called this one his political Western. Ride Lonesome is often called a small masterpiece of the Western genre. Directed by Bud Bedecker and written by Burt Kennedy, the film runs just 73 minutes, but there isn't a wasted moment. Randolph Scott plays Ben Brigade, a bounty hunter escorting the young killer Billy John through the desert. His goal isn't just to deliver Billy John, he's using him as bait to lure out Billy's brother, played by Lee Van Cleef. The supporting cast includes Pernell Roberts and James Coburn, who's making his film debut. The tension isn't just from external threats, the film is driven by shifting loyalties and psychological chess games. Critics point out that the film's power comes from its simplicity. Characters test each other through conversation rather than gunfights. In the end, Ride Lonesome distills the Western down to its essentials: a few men, a big landscape, and one unavoidable moral decision. There's a well-known story about Randolph Scott insisting Bedecker give Coburn more lines after seeing just how good he was. So this film basically launched Coburn's whole career. The tall T is what you get when you just let a good cast and crew do their thing. Randolph Scott plays Pat, a ranch foreman who loses his horse in a bet, hitches a ride on a stagecoach, and then winds up kidnapped along with an heiress by 3 outlaws. The plot's straightforward, a survival story really, and it's as focused as any Western from the era. What makes it stand out, it's the first time an Elmore Leonard story made it to the screen. Martin Scorsese is a fan, and so are a lot of people who care about the genre. Bedecker directs, Charles Lawton Jr. shoots it in Technicolor, and Burt Kennedy adapts the script. The movie just moves. Every scene matters. Even the villains feel like actual people, not cartoons. You can see why it's still held up as one of Scott's best. This one is a bit of a legend. It's the film that kicked off the whole Bedecker-Scott run, but for years nobody could even see it. Randolph Scott plays Ben Stride, ex-sheriff, chasing down 7 outlaws who killed his wife during a robbery. Simple revenge story, right? But there's more going on. He ends up helping this couple headed west, and then you've got Lee Marvin showing up as this gunfighter who's kind of friend, kind of enemy. The character interplay is what makes the movie. It's tight, it keeps turning, and the story keeps peeling back layers. This was actually meant for John Wayne, who was busy shooting The Searchers at the time, so Scott got the part, and it pretty much gave him a whole new phase in his career. But because it was a small production under Wayne's own Batjack company, it wasn't a big release. After Wayne died, the rights got tangled, and for a long time, 7 Men from Now was nearly impossible to find. UCLA restored it in 2000, screened it at the New York Film Festival, and that's when people finally got to see how good it was. Now it's just called a classic, which it probably always was.